Hello, I'm Alice, and although many years have passed since that man broke my heart, today, for the first time, I feel I must speak out, share everything, and release what has tormented me for decades. Because this wound, though seemingly healed, still hurts every time someone utters his name, and now he has returned. After all this time, Mark is back, and he came with his head down, his voice shaky, begging for forgiveness. It was just a week ago. I was in the kitchen making a traditional coffee as I do every morning. The radio was on, playing an old bolero by Los Panchos, one of those songs that transports me to simpler times. Suddenly, I heard someone knocking at the door. I thought it might be one of my grandchildren or perhaps my neighbor Rosalie, who always comes looking for sugar. But when I opened the door, my world froze. It was him, Mark. For a moment, I felt like the air was being sucked out of me. My heart stopped, unable to decide whether to beat from surprise, anger, or fear. He was standing there, motionless, as if time hadn't forgiven him anything. His sun-kissed skin, completely white hair, unkempt beard, and sunken eyes. He wore a worn-out shirt, old pants, and had a backpack slung over one shoulder. He wasn't the same man who had left, but I knew exactly who he was. "A," he whispered. I didn't respond. I felt my legs tremble, memories flooding back. I had to hold onto the doorframe to keep from falling. Inside, 1,000 emotions shook me like a hurricane. Hatred, sadness, surprise, shame, and although it pains me to admit it, a small pinch of compassion. "I'm not here to bother you," he continued. "I just wanted to see you, talk to you, ask for forgiveness." That word, forgiveness, echoed in my mind like a taunt. After all these years, after leaving me with 5 young children, penniless without an explanation, after endless days of crying, months of sleepless nights, and years of exhausting work just to feed them, now he seeks forgiveness. But I didn't shut the door on him. No, because in his eyes, I found something I had never seen before. He wasn't the same vain, distant, self-assured Mark. This man appeared broken, ill, and alone. I asked him to wait outside while I composed myself. I went to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, and felt my hands shaking so much that I spilled a little on the table. I took a deep breath. My children were all adults now, each with their own lives, homes, and families. But I still lived in the same house where I saw him leave one morning without saying goodbye. That house held all our ghosts, and now one of them had returned in flesh and blood. I went back to the door and told him to come in. He sat in the living room where, just hours earlier, my granddaughter Sophia had been playing with her dolls. I offered him coffee more out of habit than desire. Then he began to speak. He told me he had been living up north in Tijuana, that after he left, he was with another woman for a few years, but things didn't go as he had hoped, that he lost everything, that he got sick, that he felt lonely, that he thought about us, about me, and decided to come back. "I don't have the right to ask for anything," he said, "but I needed to see you, to know if you could ever forgive me." I looked at him intently and didn't know what to say, because at that moment everything I had held on to for years, all that resentment, that anger, that pain, didn't disappear, but it also didn't make me push him out onto the street. For the first time in decades, I found myself not knowing which way to turn. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the bed holding a picture of my children when they were small. We took it at Christmas, weeks after he left. All their faces were sad, their clothes patched up, while I tried to smile so they wouldn't see that I was falling apart inside. I remembered those times when we didn't even have beans to eat, the days I wore myself out, washing other people's clothes, selling tamales, doing whatever was necessary for my children. And he was somewhere else, living another life. While we were breaking apart inside, I thought about my children. Some of them don't even want to hear his name. Others say they don't care anymore, but they all carry a wound that he left behind. What right does he have to come back now? What is he really seeking redemption? A place to die in peace. That night I looked at myself in the mirror, the wrinkles on my face, the gray hairs, the dark circles under my eyes. It was all a reflection of what I had lived through. But I also saw a strong woman, a woman who never gave up. And that I owe not to him but to myself and my children. The next day I told him he could stay at the house for a few days in the back room while he decided where to go, but I didn't expect anything from him, neither affection nor compassion nor forgiveness, at least not for now. Thus began this new chapter, a phase I never imagined, where the past knocks on the door and demands to be heard, where a heart that seemed hardened starts to beat with a mix of anger and tenderness, where I, Alice, must decide if I am capable of forgiving the man who hurt me, and that's complicated. If today Mark confuses me so much, it's not just because of what he did to me, but because of everything we once shared. Because even though it's hard for me to admit now, I loved him with all my being. And when I say all, I don't say it lightly. I loved him with that intensity that one only experiences once in a lifetime, with that innocence that only comes when you believe that love can do it all, heal it all, forgive it all. We met in San Miguel de Allende, a vibrant town with cobblestone streets and skies that look painted. I was just 18 years old, working in a bakery. Mark used to come every morning to buy rolls, always with his hat slightly tilted and his hands dirty. He was an assistant on a nearby ranch and had a smile that seemed to challenge the world. He wasn't considered handsome by everyone, but he had a way of looking at you that made you feel special. The first time he spoke to me, it was to ask my name. The second time he invited me to enjoy ice cream in the square, and by the third time I couldn't resist. We fell in love quickly, as young people often do, without thinking about the consequences or the future. We got married the following year in a simple celebration at the town church. My parents weren't entirely convinced. They said Mark was unstable, that he lacked a steady job, but I defended him with all my strength. It didn't matter if we were poor, as long as we were together, I would say, with the conviction of someone who believes that love is everything. Shortly after, our first daughter Clara was born. Then came Stephen, Gabriel, Marianne, and finally David. 5 in total, each with their own characteristics and challenges, but all the result of the same love. We lived in a humble house, built little by little with our own hands. Mark used to work from dawn until dusk, doing whatever he could find. Bricklayer, laborer, collector. I sold tortillas, washed other people's clothes, and made tamales on weekends. Times were tough, yes, but there was love. I remember the nights when we all gathered in the yard, sharing a pot of atole and sweet bread. The kids played while Mark told bad jokes, and I combed the girls' hair as we listened to the stories of a neighbor who had worked in the United States. We dreamed of a better future, sending the kids to school, getting a larger piece of land, and opening a store. Though I also recall the first signs of trouble. Mark started coming home later. He insisted he had found work in the city and that he was staying with acquaintances. Sometimes he would come back smelling of alcohol. Sometimes he brought money, and other times he didn't. I wanted to believe him. I clung to the idea that he was doing everything for us, but inside something began to stir. Something whispered to me that I was losing him. When I asked him questions, he would get annoyed. "Don't you trust me?" he would say with a hard look. And I stayed quiet because I didn't want to argue, because I was already exhausted, because I had 5 mouths to feed and 1,000 problems to solve before confronting the man I still loved. I didn't want to face reality. I preferred to believe that these were just phases, that over time things would get better, that Mark would become the man who made me laugh again, who held me at night, who played with his children in the yard. I clung to that vision. I needed it to move forward, but despite that, something inside me began to fade. The children asked about him. They wanted to understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, why he wasn't telling stories anymore, why he didn't take them to the river on Sundays. I made up excuses, that he was working hard, that he loved them, that he would soon play with them again, but each lie I told became another weight on my soul. There was one night, I remember it as if it were yesterday, When I sat on the floor of the room with David in my arms, crying from exhaustion. I had no diapers, no milk, and Mark hadn't returned in 3 days. I had no one to turn to. My parents had already passed away. My sisters lived far away and were facing their own struggles. I cried silently so as not to wake the others, and in the midst of those tears I wondered if this was really love, if it was worth continuing to wait. Still, I defended him in front of everyone. Even when my neighbor Letty told me she had seen him with another woman in town, even when the rumors intensified, I covered my ears. I told myself that people just wanted to hurt me, that Mark couldn't do something like that one day he would come back home, hug us all, and apologize for his absence. But that day never came, and before I realized it, I grew accustomed to his absence, to sleeping alone, to making decisions alone, to carrying all the weight on my shoulders. I became a mother, father, nurse, and teacher all at once, without support, without love, without comfort. And now that I have him in front of me again, sitting in the back room like a stranger, I can't help but remember all of this. Not as if it were a sad movie, but as a real experience from my life, lived with pain and pride, because although I was broken, I also managed to rebuild myself, and he will never fully understand that. I always knew something was wrong, even though I resisted admitting it. There's an intuition that we women have when love begins to fade, when the looks are no longer the same, when the silence is way more than the words. But with 5 children, I couldn't afford to listen to that inner voice. I ignored it, I suppressed it, because accepting the truth would be like giving up, and I couldn't afford that luxury. The day Mark left, there were no arguments, no shouting, no slamming of doors. It was worse. There was only silence. I remember it was a morning like any other. The rooster crowed before dawn. The kids were getting ready for school, and I was making their lunches. Mark had stayed home that night after a week away, and I thought maybe things would start to get better, that he had finally understood, that he had perhaps heard my silent pleas. I was wrong. While folding Stephen and Gabriel's shirts, I found a note on the table, a crumpled piece of paper written in his rough handwriting. Just 3 lines. Alice, I'm leaving. Don't look for me. Take care of the kids. I'm sorry. The words hit me like a slap. I was frozen, the note trembling in my hands while the world around me continued to spin. Marianne asked me if she could put on her shoes yet. Clara was looking for her backpack, and I could only read those lines over and over, unable to understand them. I left like that, without a word, without explanations, without direct looks. My heart sank, but I held back my tears. Not in front of the kids. I swallowed hard, tucked the note into my apron, and forced a smile that hurt on my face. "Hurry up, kids, or you'll be late," I said casually, while inside I felt something tearing apart. That was the first great disappointment. Suspecting is one thing, but confirming that the man to whom I gave everything left without looking back is something entirely different. Hours passed and I waited, hoping it was all just a cruel joke, that he would come back by evening saying he had made a mistake and couldn't live without us. But that never happened. That night I slept alone, and the next night too. The following day, I started to ask around. I went to the workshop where he used to work, but no one knew anything or didn't want to tell me. I consulted his brother, with whom we barely spoke. "I don't know anything, Alice. Mark is like that. He doesn't let himself be found if he doesn't want to." That phrase echoed in my chest. Over time, rumors began to surface. That he had been seen in Querétaro, that he was with a younger woman, that he had left behind another family, that he had gotten into trouble. I didn't know what to believe, and I didn't want to accept anything. The kids kept asking, "Where's Dad? When's he coming back? Did he abandon us?" Each question felt like a dagger. At first I made up excuses. "But you can't lie forever." One day Clara, who was only 12, whispered to me, "Mom, we shouldn't wait for him anymore. He's not coming back." And I felt ashamed realizing that a little girl had understood before I did. Anger came later. As the months passed and it became clear he wouldn't return, I got angry with him, with myself, with God. Why me? Why my children? What had we done to deserve such abandonment? I tore up the only photo from our wedding. I took his clothes from the closet and donated them. Every item I left behind was a reminder of the void he had caused. But that feeling of absence lingered because it wasn't just the man who left. It was the partner, the father, and the provider who was gone. The dream of a united family faded away, leaving me with 5 children who didn't understand, who cried at night, who pretended to be fine so as not to upset me. David, the youngest, stopped talking for weeks and started wetting the bed. Marianne became reluctant to socialize, and Stephen began to fight at school. I tried to stay calm, but inside I was falling apart. The biggest disappointment wasn't his departure, but the fact that he never returned. He showed no interest in his children, didn't send money, nor wrote a letter, nothing at all. It was as if he had never existed, as if we had been a forgettable chapter in his life. Still, I got up every morning, made breakfast, balanced the bills, and looked for a job. Because if he abandoned us, I couldn't do the same. I couldn't afford to fall apart. I had 5 reasons to stay standing. That was the true beginning of my loneliness, when I realized I was no longer a wife, that I couldn't wait for anyone, and that my only responsibility in life was to take care of my children, with a heart broken and my soul exhausted. That's how the deepest disappointment became my new normal. A point of no return, the death of hope. For months I lived between 2 worlds, the brutal reality that hit me daily and the stubborn faith that refused to die. Because even though Mark was gone, I still woke up hoping to hear the sound of the door opening. Sometimes I would even set an extra plate at the table without realizing it, or keep some tortillas aside in case he came home late. I clung to small routines that made me believe his absence would be temporary. It was like living in a thick fog. I moved by inertia, getting the kids up. I took them to school, went to the river to wash clothes or cleaned other people's houses, cooked, sewed, scolded, and cried in the bathroom so no one would hear me. I told myself I was fine, that I could handle everything, and that I didn't need Mark. It was a lie I told myself to survive, because there were nights when I would hug his old shirt, the only one I hadn't managed to throw away, and I would fall asleep inhaling a scent that was no longer there. There were days when I would sit on the bench in front of the house watching the street, imagining he would walk up just like he used to, with that firm stride and that smile that had charmed me. My children began to sense that disconnect. Clara, always so mature for her age, looked at me with compassion. She didn't say anything, but I knew she understood. Stephen, on the other hand, became rebellious. I blame myself for everything. He shouted at me once, "If you had been a better wife, he wouldn't have left." That sentence hurt me deeply. I didn't respond. What could I say? I didn't even know if he was right. Deep down, I felt guilty. I questioned what I had done wrong. I had neglected him. I had been too demanding, cold, poor, old. I tortured myself searching for answers where there were none. Every day was a struggle between reason and heart. Reason told me he had left of his own accord, that he had chosen not to be here. But my heart insisted that there must be a justification, a powerful reason, a force that had pulled him away against his will. I even began to think that maybe he had been kidnapped, that something terrible had happened to him. A part of me preferred to cling to that rather than accept the truth, that he had simply abandoned us. I remember one particular early morning. It had rained all day and the roof was leaking. I was awakened by David's cries, shivering because his mattress was wet. I picked him up, held him tightly, and as I rocked him, I sang a lullaby that Mark used to sing to him. When I finished, David looked at me with those sad eyes and asked, "Doesn't Daddy love me anymore?" In that moment, I broke. I couldn't bear it any longer. I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and cried like a little girl. I screamed silently, hit the wall, and covered my mouth with my hands so no one could hear me. It was a catharsis. the release of everything I had been holding in. Not just the sadness, but also the fear, the anger, the frustration, the helplessness. That night, for the first time, I allowed myself to feel everything I had been suppressing, but by the next dawn, I woke up with swollen eyes and a shattered soul. Yet I kept getting up, maintaining the facade. I kept telling the kids that Dad was away for work, that he would send something soon, that he loved them and missed them. Little lies, because I didn't know how to tell them the truth, since I myself wasn't ready to accept it. Denial was my protection, shielding me from absolute pain and helping me stay on my feet when everything around me was falling apart. Because accepting the reality that the man I loved had decided to leave without looking back was something I still couldn't bear. For several months I lived like this, surrounded by silence, hidden tears, and memories that haunted me when I least expected them. I clung to old photos, ancient letters, and the belongings he had left behind. I kept them in a box under the bed, as if that could bring him closer to me, as if I could freeze time. But time does not forgive. My children were growing up, bills were piling up, exhaustion was consuming me, and little by little the denial began to crumble. Not because I wanted it to, but because life doesn't allow you to deceive yourself forever. One day, I found the box with his things, soaked from a water leak. The letters had faded and the photos were deteriorating. It felt like a sign, as if the universe was saying to me, "Enough already, let him go." And I understood that even though I hadn't fully accepted it yet, I had to start doing so. I needed to move forward, despite the pain and the uncertainty of how to do it, because my children needed me, because I needed me too, and because he wouldn't be coming back. Over time, the denial became unsustainable. There was no room for illusions or excuses. Mark would not return. I knew this for certain that morning when Marianne fell seriously ill, and I spent 3 days without sleep, praying by her side, pleading for help. And he wasn't there. There was no one else, just me facing fear, misery, and a loneliness that clung to my being like the winter cold. When a woman finds herself alone with 5 children, life becomes a daily struggle. There is no rest, no truce. Every day brings its own battle. Finding food, paying the rent, caring for illnesses, enduring insults, facing those who judge and murmur, who point fingers. "There goes the one who was abandoned by her husband," they said, as if I were to blame, as if the shame were mine. The first years turned out to be the hardest. I would wake up before the sun rose to prepare breakfasts, get the kids ready, and walk to the market, where I sold freshly made tortillas. My hands ached from kneading, my back from carrying, and my feet from walking. I only ate once a day to ensure there was enough for them. There were entire weeks when we only had rice and lentils, and others when not even that. Sometimes I would sit on the bed at night, watching my children sleep, questioning how to go on, wondering if I would have the strength to endure another day, if we would ever escape that pit. But seeing David hugging his old teddy bear, or Stephen protecting Clara from feeling cold, gave me a reason to keep breathing. Mark's absence was not just physical, it was a shadow enveloping us. My children missed him, but they also hated him. Sometimes they spoke of him with nostalgia, other times with resentment. Gabriel would often ask me why his dad hadn't taken him with him. It pained him to think he wasn't valuable enough to be chosen. That idea stayed with him throughout the years, leaving a deep mark on his character. I tried to fill that void, striving to be mother, father, confidant, and role model, but I was also human, and there were days when I simply couldn't take it anymore. One day, I fainted in the middle of the street. I had been sleeping only 3 hours a night, eating what was left on the children's plates, working in 2 houses, and selling food in the afternoons. I fell immediately in front of Mrs. Meg's stall. I woke up in the health center with an IV in my arm and a doctor looking at me with a serious expression. "You're harming yourself, ma'am," he said. "You need to rest, you need to eat." And all I could do was let out a bitter laugh. "Rest? And who's going to take care of my children? You?" The doctor watched me in silence. He knew there was no answer. My body started to betray me. Constant pains appeared, chronic fatigue, and hair loss. But the most intense suffering was not physical. It was that deep loneliness I experienced even in the company of my children, because I couldn't share my feelings with anyone. I didn't want them to worry about me or to see me as weak. My only outlet was writing. I filled notebooks with letters that I never sent. Letters addressed to Mark, to God, to myself. In them, I expressed everything I held in during the day. Sometimes I would write to Mark as if he were still here, as if he could still hear me. Today, David has learned to read on his own. Marianne no longer fears sleeping alone. Stephen broke a window but repaired it himself. I shared everything he was missing out on, and every time I closed a notebook, I felt a little weight lift from my chest, even though the next day another weight would add on. The children were growing up, and with them so were the problems. Adolescence brought rebellion, tough questions, and wounds I didn't know how to heal. I felt guilty for not being able to provide more for them, for not being able to buy them new shoes or send Clara to the public speaking contest in the capital because we didn't have the money for the fare, for not being able to stop Gabriel from getting involved in fights or Stephen from secretly smoking. All I wanted was to offer them a dignified existence, but at times the only thing I could give them was love, and that didn't seem to be enough. Nevertheless, there was something inside me that refused to give up. In the midst of that loneliness and overwhelming exhaustion, I began to discover a strength I didn't know I possessed. I became tougher, yes, but also much stronger. I learned to haggle with merchants, to stand up to abusive men, to fix things around the house, and to support my family with sheer determination. I transformed into a different woman. I was no longer the Alice in love. I was the Alice who had survived. Even though my heart was still shattered, even though loneliness stalked me like a shadow, every step I took was for my children. Because if he had abandoned them, I had no intention of doing so. And so, with cracked hands, a tired soul, and a more determined gaze, I kept moving forward. Each day a little further from the past, each day a little closer to the woman that abandonment could not destroy. There was a moment when, for no reason, I stopped in front of the bathroom mirror and didn't recognize myself. I had my hair hastily tied back, my blouse stained with dough, dark circles under my eyes like scars, and a dull look. It wasn't just exhaustion. It seemed that the woman reflected back had lost all hope in life, and that hurt me more than any abandonment. Because I, Alice, the young woman who dreamed of having her own shop, of traveling someday, and of seeing her children succeed, no longer existed. She had been lost among tortillas, tears, silences, and unpaid debts. That day, I made a decision. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't bring Mark back. And even if I could, I no longer wanted to. But I did have the ability to change my present. It wasn't for him, not even for my children. It was for me because I deserved it, because I needed something more than just existing. I deserved to live fully. I started with something simple. I signed up for a sewing workshop being offered at the parish. At first, I had my doubts. I felt ridiculous, older, out of place, but Mrs. Matilda, who was in charge, welcomed me with a kind smile and words I will never forget. "It's never too late to start over, Alice. Never." There, I met other women with experiences similar to mine. Some were widows, others were abandoned. All were warriors. We became a sort of makeshift family. We shared more than just simple stitches. We shared pains, fears, and small achievements. For the first time in a long while, I felt understood and heard. And it wasn't long before that workshop transformed into something more meaningful. With the little I earned from selling tortillas, I bought affordable fabrics and started making embroidered napkins, then bags, and later pillowcases. I sold them at the market on weekends. Although at first I only made just enough, the joy of seeing something made by my own hands please someone else filled me with a happiness I thought I had lost. My children noticed the change. "Mom, you look different," Clara would say to me. And yes, there was a change. Perhaps I was more physically tired, but there was a spark in my eyes that hadn't shone in years. Over time, I managed to save a little, just enough to repair the roof that had caused us so much trouble. Then, I painted the front of the house with the help of Stephen and Gabriel. It wasn't much, but for me, it meant rebuilding my life brick by brick. Every modification to the house represented a message. We are here. You did not bring us down. The most beautiful thing was seeing my children start to bloom as well. Marianne began to help me with sales. She learned to sew better than I did. Stephen got a job at a tire place. Clara received a scholarship to continue her studies. Gabriel stopped fighting at school and became more peaceful. David began to laugh again. We started celebrating birthdays with a cake, even if it was modest. Singing songs together at night, watching movies on Mrs. Meg's borrowed television. They were simple things, but for us they meant the world. And in the midst of all this, something happened that I never would have imagined. One afternoon, while I was at the market, an older, well-dressed and polite man approached me. He asked for a cushion cover and started chatting with me. His name was Ernest, a widower. I had a small stationery store in the neighboring district. Over time, we started seeing each other more often, first as customers, then as acquaintances, and eventually as something more. There was nothing romantic between us, and perhaps there never would be. However, her company reminded me that I was more than an abandoned mother, that I could still laugh, talk, and enjoy a walk without feeling guilty. She restored my sense of being a woman, and that was a gift I didn't expect. During that time, I also realized that I no longer needed Mark. I didn't miss him, nor did I hate him. He simply had stopped having a place in my life. Then, just as I felt that life was finally giving me back something it had taken, he returned, knocking on the door, dirty, sick, with eyes begging for forgiveness. And although my heart felt moved, I was no longer the same Alice as before. I was no longer the broken woman seeking answers. I was a stronger, more complete version of myself, with scars, yes, but firm. And now I faced a new decision, one I would not take from pain or resentment, but from the peace that had cost me so much to achieve. I watched him from the kitchen, sitting in a wooden chair in the back room. He looked diminished, not just by age or illness, but by guilt. Mark was no longer the broad-shouldered, confident man who once made me laugh with his antics. He was a shadow of what he had been. His body looked frail, his hands trembled, his voice barely a whisper. But what struck me the most was his silence. That silence spoke more than any apology. 3 days had passed since I allowed his presence, 3 days filled with tension. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone, not even to my children. I was processing the situation, grappling with my thoughts, choosing how to face the memories without letting them consume me. Until one morning, I sat at the table and looked him in the eyes. I need you to speak, Mark, and not to deceive me even once more. His voice trembled. He looked down, then lifted his gaze with difficulty, as if every word he was about to say weighed heavily. There's nothing I can say that justifies what I did, Alice. I only know that I didn't have the courage to face what I left behind. I was weak. I crossed my arms. I didn't want pity. I needed answers. Why? Why did you leave that way? Why didn't you ever come back? Not even for the kids. He rubbed his face with his hands. At first, I thought it would just be for a few days. I needed to escape. I was tired, confused, frustrated for not being able to offer them a better life. I felt useless, small, and then I met someone, a woman. She promised me a life without obligations, without reproaches. And I was weak, very weak. I felt a sharp pain in my heart, years of suffering summed up in that phrase. And the kids, Mark, did you think of them while you were with that woman? While starting a new life? Yes, he replied, tears streaming down his cheeks every day, but every day it became harder to come back. The shame, the fear of your reaction. I convinced myself it was better not to disturb them, that they would be better off without me. That wasn't true, I asserted with determination. Your children grew up with a wound that nobody could heal. They became men and women with scars you can't imagine, and I shattered my soul to feel your absence. Mark remained silent. Tears flowed freely down his face. For a moment I felt the temptation to pity him, but I forced myself to remember, not out of resentment, but out of respect for my story, for the woman I was. I mentioned that night we would have a conversation with the kids, that they deserved to know the truth, that he would have to look them in the eyes and face what he had done. That afternoon I called them all. Stephen was the first to arrive, always so protective. Then Clara, serious but affectionate. Gabriel with his inquisitive gaze, Marianne the most sensitive, and David, my little David, now grown into a man with his soul still in the process of being rebuilt. When Mark walked into the room, everyone was taken aback. At first no one said a word. The silence was a cutting knife in the air. "Dad," Marianne whispered. "Don't call him that," intervened Stephen, fists clenched. "That man is not our father." Mark knelt down, literally got on his knees in front of them. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to express to you that I love you, that I have always loved you. Even if I was a coward, I don't want to justify myself. I just needed to see you, to know that you are okay, to die in peace knowing I saw you one more time." The words "die in peace" felt like a bucket of cold water. Mark confessed to them that he was suffering from advanced stage cancer, that he had only a few months left, that he arrived without money, family, or a home, and that he wasn't looking for anything, just to close the chapter. My children reacted in different ways. Clara cried silently. Gabriel left the room without saying a word. Marianne hugged him, trembling. Stephen insulted him. David sat in front of him and said, "I don't remember you, but I know I needed you." I watched everything without intervening. It wasn't my moment anymore. It was theirs. It was their story too. That night, after everyone had left, Mark asked me if he could stay until he found somewhere to go. I told him he could stay in the back room like he had until now, but not to expect anything more from me. "Thank you, Alice," he said, "for allowing me in even though I don't deserve it." And I replied softly but firmly, "I don't do it for you. I do it for me because I no longer want to carry this resentment, because I deserve peace, and in the end my children deserve to say goodbye to this story with dignity." I left him alone in his dark room while I returned to my bed, feeling lighter of heart than I had in many years. The weeks following our reunion felt like walking on a tightrope. Mark stayed in the back room. He rarely came out and asked for nothing. He ate what I left at the door. He quietly expressed his thanks and fell back into his silence. My children came to see me more often, but they avoided crossing paths with him. The atmosphere was tense, as if we were all waiting for something to happen. And it did. It was Gabriel who found the box. It was in the old armoire of Mark's room. He discovered it by accident while helping me take out blankets. "Can I open this?" he asked me with that mix of suspicion and curiosity that had always characterized him since he was little. I nodded, not imagining what was inside. Inside the box were papers, envelopes, photographs, many of them with old dates, covered in dust but well preserved. Among them were letters, dozens of letters, all addressed to me and my children, which Mark had written over the years, some with shaky handwriting, others clearly stained by tears, letters that were never sent. Gabriel read them silently, then handed them to me without saying a word. That night, I sat at the table and read them all one by one. It was the first era of 3 months after his departure. I don't know how to explain what I did. All I know is that I despise myself every day for having left them. In another moment, I told myself that I tried to go back, but I didn't have the courage. I saw you from a distance, washing clothes and the kids playing. It broke me inside. I felt like I didn't deserve that place, and I just walked away. The hardest messages were the ones directed to the children. I sent David a message that said, "I know you don't have any memories of me, son, but I want you to know that when you were a baby, I would fall asleep holding you, and your laughter was my greatest comfort. Not being there to support you as you grew was the hardest pain I've ever felt." Then I clarified, "You've always been my light. I remember how you would hug my legs, begging me not to go to work, and in that moment I felt like I failed you, my girl. I cried like I hadn't in years. Not for him, but for me, for all the things those words couldn't heal, for the hugs that were never given, for the lonely birthdays, for the decisions I made in solitude while those letters remained hidden. The next day, I gathered my children, showed them the box, and handed each of them their letters. For a long time there was silence, just the rustle of paper and the sobs that emerged. Stephen broke down in tears, something he hadn't done since childhood. Marianne covered her mouth with her hand. David held his letter like it was a treasure. In that moment, everything changed. We understood that although Mark had been absent, he couldn't escape the weight of his guilt, that this was neither an excuse nor a path to redemption, but rather a reality. And that reality had the power to heal wounds, not erase them, but allow us to breathe with less burden. Days later, Mark asked me to accompany him to a medical appointment. The cancer was progressing rapidly. The doctor had given him weeks, maybe a month, and he, for the first time, wanted to face his end with dignity. I was surprised that I accepted, not for him, but for me, because I didn't want him to leave as a mere specter. I wished for my children, if they wanted to have the chance to see that fragile, human, and remorseful man, and to make their own choice about forgiveness. One by one, they began to approach. Stephen sat down to talk with him one afternoon, exchanging words about football as if they were two strangers with a common interest. Marianne handed him a drawing she had created as a child, one she had kept all those years. Gabriel asked her about her life. She looked at him sternly but listened. And today I understand that it wasn't about me. Mark made his choices based on his own shadows, while I did the best I could with what I had, which was love, strength, and courage. I raised 5 children on my own. I offered them the best of me, even in moments when I had nothing for myself. I taught them to fight, to be honest, and to value effort. I didn't enjoy luxuries or vacations, but each of them is living proof that I didn't fail. I was both mother and father, caregiver and guide, an example and a refuge. Mark's return stirred many emotions within me. It confronted me with my history, my fears, and my pride, but it also granted me something unexpected, a chance to let go. Because forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else. It's a gift you give to yourself. I didn't forgive Mark because he deserved it. I forgave him because I no longer wanted to carry him on my back, because I needed to make space in my soul for other things. Serenity, gratitude, the joy of seeing my grandchildren run through the garden free from the chains of old wounds. I also learned to view my children with a new perspective. I saw in them not just what they had lost, but also what they had gained, the ability to love, heal, and rebuild. In Stephen, I perceived a nobility forged in the midst of anger. In Clara, a sensitivity that springs only from those who have suffered. In Gabriel, a longing for justice. In Marianne, a sweetness that remained intact despite everything. And in David, the tenderness of someone who decided not to repeat the story. Now I know that each one found their own path to forgiveness. Some found it, others are still searching, and that's okay. There's no single way to heal. The fundamental thing is not to get trapped in the pain. Mark left weeks later. He passed away quietly in his bed, without grand goodbyes, but he didn't die alone. David was by his side. And although there wasn't a perfect reconciliation or dramatic hugs, there was something much more valuable: humanity, compassion, and peace. After his death, I collected his belongings, and today I understand that this was not something that concerned me. Mark made his decisions from his own darkness, while I did what I could with what I had. And what I had was love, strength, and courage. I raised 5 children on my own, offering them the best of myself, even in times when I had nothing for me. I taught them to fight, to be honest, and to value effort. Although I lacked luxuries and vacations, each of them is proof that I did not fail, that I was both mother and father, guide and protector, example and refuge. Mark's arrival stirred many things within me. It became a challenge with my past, my fears, and my pride, but at the same time, it gave me something unexpected, the opportunity to let go, because forgiveness isn't a gift meant for the other, but a present we give to ourselves. I didn't forgive Mark because he deserved it. I did it because I no longer wanted to carry his weight on my shoulders. I longed to make space in my soul for new experiences. I wanted peace, gratitude, and the joy of watching my grandchildren play in the yard without the burden of old wounds. I also learned to view my children from a new perspective. In them, I saw not only what they had lost, but what they had gained. The ability to love, to heal, and to redefine themselves. I recognized in Stephen a nobility forged in the midst of anger. In Clara, a sensitivity that only arises after suffering. In Gabriel, a yearning for justice. In Marianne, a sweetness that endured despite adversities. And in David, the tenderness of someone who chose not to repeat the cycle. Now I acknowledge that each one found their own path to forgiveness. Some found it, others are still searching, and that's okay. There's no single way to heal. What matters is not to remain anchored in pain. Mark passed away weeks later. He died in his bed quietly without grand farewells, but he didn't leave alone. David was by his side. And although there wasn't a perfect reconciliation or dramatic hugs, there was something even more valuable: humanity, compassion, and peace. After his death, I gathered his belongings. I found more letters than I had ever received, but I no longer felt the urgency to read them because for me, that chapter was closed. He was part of my story, not the entirety of my life. My story encompasses much more. I am Alice, a woman, a mother, a fighter, a survivor, and at the end of this journey, free. Today, I find myself on the same bench in front of my home, the one I've occupied countless times waiting for something that never arrived. The sunlight gently falls on the cobblestones. The neighborhood children play and laugh carefreely, and I simply breathe. I breathe with tranquility. Months have passed since Mark left for good. There wasn't a crowded funeral, no tributes, no ostentatious flowers, just a simple cross and a few words spoken with respect. My children decided not to speak of him aloud, but each in their own way found their own closure. Sometimes I reflect on Mark as a violent, destructive storm, but also as an inescapable part of the existential cycle. Unintentionally, he taught me the hardest and most powerful lesson. You can lose everything and still move forward. That abandonment does not define the one who is left behind, but rather what destroys us also unveils us. I continue living in the same house. We all contribute to its improvement. We paint the walls, plant flowers, and hang pictures of the grandchildren. Where there once were cracks, now there is color. Where there was silence, now music resonates. Because in the end, life always finds a way to reintroduce itself. My grandchildren play in the yard and sometimes ask me if their grandfather was good or bad. I offer them the only answer I feel I can share sincerely. He was a man. He made mistakes like anyone else, but he also left us valuable lessons. They don't need to know more. There's no need to carry what no longer hurts us. For my part, I have made peace with the woman I was. The love-struck young girl, the lonely mother, the tireless worker, the broken woman, the rebuilt woman. All of them coexist within me, and each had her moment. Now I'm just Alice, the one who laughs with her grandchildren, the one who enjoys embroidery for pleasure, the one who savors her coffee without rushing, the one who walks to church on Sundays without the weight in her heart. I have forgiven Mark. Yes, but not for him, rather for me, because I learned that it's not about justifying the unjustifiable, but about choosing not to live tied to the past, because I deserve peace, because I no longer wish to struggle with ghosts. And if you, who are listening to this, are facing abandonment, betrayal, or loss, let me say something I wish I had heard many years ago. You are not alone, and you are not broken. You are simply learning to live again, because love, though it hurts, does not define you. What truly defines you is how you rise, how you continue, how you decide not to give up. And that, dear, that is the bravest thing a woman can do. I am Alice. This is my story, and today I can finally share it with a calm soul. I am at peace.